Yes, ladies and gentlemen, episode 70 of the Pokemon Journeys anime titled, Please Get Morpeko just dropped, and in this episode, Team Rocket can't continue doing anything with Morpeko around, so they decide to release it back into the wild, but in doing so, shenanigans occurs. What happens? Well, let's find out. Recap. Team Rocket want to release Morpeko to the wild because it's just eating everything, and at this point, they can't continue living and doing any of their stuff they want to do because they're just hungry all the time. So, Team Rocket tasks James with releasing it. James, while trying to release it, starts bonding with Morpeko, however, and even though he tries to leave it in the city, it keeps returning to its base because it leaves a little bit of food behind as it's walking outside. They then see our heroes with Go trying to capture Pokemon in the city, so they try to pawn off Morpeko to Go, but keep failing. Eventually, it hops on a van full of food on its own accord and Team Rocket leave it, with James still being unsure of the whole thing. The food van then arrives at Cerise's laboratory as the food is meant for all the Pokemon there, and Morpeko starts eating everything, and he has a bit of a confrontation with Go's greetant, but because there's plenty of food, it doesn't seem to really cause any issues. We also get to see some of Go's Pokemon that we haven't seen in a while, like Drizzile, so that was pretty cool. Afterwards, Ash and Go continue to try to find a Pigeotto or a Pidgeot for Go to capture, which is a nice little callback to the Gary episode when he tried to catch a Pidgeot and couldn't, and while they're doing that, they hear things going down in the nearby mall. Turns out Team Rocket are trying to steal all of the Pokemon now that they're full, with Morpeko no longer eating their food. A battle ensues between Team Rocket and our heroes, and eventually Morpeko, who had been following our heroes, stumbles upon Team Rocket and all the food. It turns into its hangry mode, and Jesus, that stomping tantrum looked painful, and it eventually blasts off Team Rocket. As Team Rocket are hanging off of trees after their blast off, they see Morpeko looking for Team Rocket, trying to find it. Jessie and Meowth want to just let it go, but James decides to catch it and make it part of the team, thus ending the episode. Some small nitpicks I found while watching the episode before I talk about the episode itself. One thing I found weird in this episode is when Team Rocket are discussing their plan to dump Morpeko, for some reason Morpeko can't understand them even though it's right next to them, so it's not like he didn't properly hear them. And we know that Pokemon and humans can instinctively understand each other in the Pokemon world. But even if that wasn't the case here, Meowth is right next to it and talking. I guess since Meowth is speaking in human language, Morpeko can't understand? I don't know, that was a bit strange to me. There's also a bit of a strange cut in the editing here that took me out of the episode and made me question something. So as the food van pulls up to Cerise's laboratory, we see this entrance. But then the next scene we see is Ren pushing this thing. So it seems like Ren somehow managed to push a cart full of food up these incredibly awkward looking stairs. How is that even possible? I'm sure maybe that's not what they meant to imply, but the way the editing is done here, that's the only explanation I can think of. Also, there's a small error in the mall scene because you can hear Pelipper's cry when Team Rocket calls for his prize master, even though there's no Pelipper around. Now on to the actual review of the episode itself. The capture of Morpeko is a strange one to me. On the one hand, it makes sense. It's been around them in some capacity since the first time they went to Galar. But the thing is, it's been nothing but trouble for them. It isn't like their previous Pokemon who had their quirks but still battled with them when called upon. It's not like Beware where it takes care of them even if it actively stops them from doing things. Morpeko actively hurts them in their plans 99% of the time. So why would James want to capture it? Don't get me wrong, it reflects well on his character and is consistent with his character. He's always been the moral center of the group. He is, at most times, the thing that takes them from going too far as villains. But while they conclude this episode with Jessie saying that it's strong so maybe they can keep it around, but why? It's not like they're gonna use it for battles. That's what they use their prize master for. They get Pokemon out of them and battle them. And it's not like Morpeko changes or learns any sort of lesson before this episode or in this episode to make it more appealing to capture. If we look at just the pure story of this episode, Team Rocket wants to get rid of Morpeko, James tries to do it but struggles as it builds a small bond with it and finds it cute, then eventually it returns after not being around them for a while and shows that it's strong before James captures it. There's nothing there in between to show me a reason why James wants to capture it. The only reasoning I can come up with is that maybe the writers are slowly phasing out the prize master. Jessie already has a Choodle, and now James has a Morpeko. So maybe now they can use their Pokemon more regularly, which allows them to use the prize master less and less. I don't know, maybe that's just wishful thinking. Besides that, the episode is structured very strangely too. It doesn't have your standard plot arc to it. There's no real conflict in this episode. I guess there's internal conflict for James as he doesn't want to release the thing, but that plot point only occurs after the first time James releases it, and that only happens twice. Once when Team Rocket is planning to get all the Pokemon in the mall, and second is after they've been blasted off. Because during the mall scene, they're too busy trying to fight with Zigzagoon and Natu for James or Morpeko's plot to come into play. But besides that thread, it just feels disjointed. The middle portion of the episode, specifically the one that ends up with Morpeko in Cerise's laboratory eating all the food, can be cut out entirely and you wouldn't miss a single thing in the plot. You might argue that it allowed Morpeko to follow Ash and go, so it ended up in the mall at the very end, but Morpeko could have just stumbled upon the mall and the same thing would have happened. It makes no difference. The episode feels like it had a beginning and an end of an episode, but couldn't quite figure out what they wanted to put in the middle, so they crammed it with a bit of filler. Overall, it's not a bad episode, it's an alright episode. I just think the episode stumbles a bit both with its motivation and its execution. Overall, I'd rank this episode a Pokeball. The next episode is the beginning of Project Mew. It doesn't seem like this is going to be a continuous arc, rather it's going to be an overarching plot that our heroes keep coming back to. I'm excited to see how this first one goes. But anyways, that is it for my review of episode 70 of the Journeys anime. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, like, share, subscribe in the comments, let me know your thoughts on this episode. You can follow me on Twitter at TheRealPDGaming, and that's it. I'll talk to you guys later. Peace.